Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Millennial Money. So this week we're going to tell you how you can get yourself a pay rise with your employer. So Damien's going to kick it off this week, so give us a tip.
So when you are trying to get a pay rise, only pick battles that you can win, because you won't get the pay rise if you don't deserve one. Now, what you need to do is you need to create a case for having a pay rise. So you need to be proving that your worth to the company, the value, pointing out the things that you're building a case of, all the sort of training you've done, the responsibilities you have. So the first thing is be honest with yourself. Do you really deserve a pay rise? And it's not just you thinking you'd like one, so you could go out and spend money on things that you would really like to have but can't afford.
Quite a good one on that actually as well is if you still have your job description, go back and look at what your job description was and see what you do above and beyond your job description. Because if you do quite a lot more in your day to day, then you've kind of got a good case to say, I go above and beyond in my work.
See, that's a good tip. See, it's kind of do your homework. That leads on to the next one. So like Lauren said, do your homework around what your responsibilities are and what they should be, and the ones that you're doing that are perhaps from the level up from where you are at the moment. Also, go and look beyond your workplace. So go and look at what the salaries are out there for people doing the same job as you, but for different companies. Now, you can find that out by looking at adverts. So job adverts, there's lots of recruitment agencies out there you can even speak to, and you'll find out what the going rate for your job is. Look at the qualifications you need, because if you're going to present this at some point as evidence that you deserve a pay rise, then you need to make sure that you're meeting and ticking all of those boxes and meeting all the requirements. So do your research before you then even think about having a discussion with your employer.
The next tip is making sure that you take control. So the best thing for you to do is when you ask to speak to your manager is ask them for a formal meeting and hint at the fact you want to talk about your performance or your future, but don't do it over making a cup of tea in the office or anything like that. You want to have a formal meeting and discussion with your manager.
Yeah, you don't want to do it when they're stressed. So don't do it at month end when everything's going completely bandy and people are running around like headless chickens, because that isn't conducive for you trying to get something from your manager. Trust me, we've all been there, we've all tried it. So make sure you pick a time that is going to be, particularly early in the morning, has been shown to be a good time to have meetings with people, because they're fresh, full of energy, rather than at the end of the day when they just want to go home and get away from the rest of their co-workers.
Another thing on that to bear in mind actually as well is don't go asking for a pay rise if your company is making job cuts. If they're making people redundant, the likelihood of you getting a pay rise is probably very slim. So also bear that in mind when you're asking for a pay rise. Don't ask for something in an unrealistic situation.
And okay, so one of the last things we should come on to, one of the main topics really, is about don't argue. So you don't go in there in the meeting we're talking about, you don't go in there in a very sort of aggressive fashion. It's going to be a discussion with your employer as to why you think you should have a pay rise. So let them explain to you why they think you should or shouldn't have a pay rise, and then you should be prepared with all that evidence we talked about, ready to come back with a response. Now, like I said, don't argue with them, because you're less likely to get it, because it's human psychology. If somebody is aggressive, that you're going to reciprocate that. So a very good trick or technique that I've used in the past that's been successful is to try and get people to think like you. So if I was going to ask for a pay rise, what I would say to people, well, if you were me, if you were in my shoes, how would you feel if given I have done or achieved, and list all my sort of achievements, that I've got a pay rise less than inflation or something like that. So what you're doing is you're forcing the person to have to answer that. Don't let them squirm out of it. Get them to answer the question. And by them thinking like you, they'd have to say, well, yeah, okay, I wouldn't be too happy. Already you're starting to win the battle, because you're getting them to think like you. They're coming on your side of the table, and you're more likely to actually convince somebody to give you something that you want. And that's true in life generally. So with a pay rise, try and use that technique, because it has proved to be successful for me personally in the past.
And finally, remember that no doesn't mean never. So just because you got a no this time doesn't mean that you won't get a pay rise in the future. Try and ask your manager if there's anything you can work towards to try and get a pay rise. So if you need to work harder, get a qualification, ask them so that you have something to work towards.
And the key thing to this is you need to leave any meeting with an action plan. So you need to have these things written down. So there's confirmation in writing that what was spoken about in the meeting. So if you achieve those goals, you start boxing your employer in a corner, making it almost impossible for them not to give you a pay rise if you've achieved all the things that they say you should achieve for them to give you a pay rise in the future. So it's all about building up a case for you getting a pay rise. And don't forget, the other thing is, if your employer doesn't give you a pay rise, then you only are treated how you let people treat you. So if you are really unhappy with the fact that you're not going to receive a pay rise, you have to be prepared to leave, because that gives you extra leverage. And in the end, you probably do need to leave if your employer is never going to give you a pay rise. And the final thing I would say is, no matter what discussion occurs in that meeting, try and end on a positive note. So you're not going out the meeting basically enemies, because you're less likely to get a pay rise in the future. Make sure it's ended up on a positive note, how much you like working there and how much you like being part of the team.
Yeah, so that's it for this week. Let us know how you get on if you use any of these tips to try and get a pay rise. If you like what we do, take a look at our other YouTube videos and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on our social media, our Facebook, Money to the Masses, our Instagram @Money to the Masses, and our Twitter @Money to the Masses with the number 2. And on that note, Damien, can I have a pay rise?
I had thought that when we were doing this.